That's wholly unexpected. Thank you for your message of honesty. Obsolescence of professionalism. I thought perhaps today you wanted me as Exhibit A of. I can't cover 67 years in 40 minutes, but I'll make an effort at it. And it is odd the way I happened to come to Oklahoma. I went to St. Louis to spend a few days at Christmas time in 1902, and just to loaf around there, and I read an article in one of the St. Louis papers interviewing Mayor Carter Harrison of Chicago, and he had just been in Texas, and he described riding through Oklahoma on a train and seeing the fields that were white with cotton. He said that Oklahoma is a territory that can raise all the crops of the South and the crops of the North. It's between Kansas and Texas. Someday it'll be a great state. And if I were a young man, I would go there to locate. Well, that hit me just like that, and I looked up. I knew nothing about Oklahoma really, and I looked up in the Ayers directory what newspapers there were, and there were only two towns of any size, Oklahoma City and Guthrie. Guthrie had a population of 10,006, and Oklahoma City had 10,037, and I couldn't understand why two towns would have that. I found out later, it might as well tell you now, neither one of them had 10,000 in 1900. But both of them had, they had the registration books at their hotels, and they had the names on the tombstones, and they got enough to make it 10,000. And the reason for it was Oklahoma's a territory that was under a czar. He was the Secretary of the Interior, and he decreed that no town in Oklahoma could vote bonds for City Hall till they had 10,000 population. That's the way we got it. Well, I came down here, and it was a little prairie cow town. I don't know if it had 10,000 population. But I decided to look it all over, and I wanted to buy a newspaper or an interest in one, and I walked all around the business section, and I looked at the stores to see what they had on sale. You can tell what the people are like by what they buy. And I passed a music store and was surprised to see there were several Kimball pianos and then one Steinway. And I thought, well, there's some people here of education and culture. And I went to a banker, and I asked him about the two newspapers and who owned them, and he told me who they were, and I asked him if they were honest, reliable people. Well, he said, yes, I guess so. And I said, well, which is a better paper? Which would you want to be about? He said, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. Neither one of them is worth a whoop in hell. I went to the Times Journal was the evening paper. I thought I'd rather work on an evening paper instead of the morning. I'd had enough of morning paper for a while. But they weren't interested at all in having a partner. And I went to the other one. It was owned by Roy Stafford. Single ownership, and he was quite interested in having a business manager and somebody with experience in running a paper a little bigger than his. He was located at 18 South Broadway in a room 25 by 60 feet. The first 15 feet on each side, he had the editorial was on this side and the business was on this side. There was a bookkeeper and a circulation manager over here, and there was a Sid, the editor, who was also the only reporter he had, and there was a telegraph editor there. Well, there was a little partition then, and back the rest of the building was both a job shop and a newspaper plant. You had a little flatbed press that could print about 2,000 an hour, and you had only 3,500 circulation. The place was the dirtiest I've ever been in anywhere. There were cobwebs hanging down the ceiling, actually a foot, or I think some of them a foot and a half. The dirt on the floor, and in the composing room there were cuttings from the job printing around there, ankle deep all around. Everything as dirty as it could be. Well, I broached him on the subject, and he was interested. And I gave him references as to me, and he gave me references as local bankers and so forth. And I agreed to come back in a couple of weeks, which I did. Although in the meantime, I thought I'd heard the possibility of something in Fort Worth, and I went down there. But I didn't like the town, and it's too near to Dallas anyway to make it. I thought Oklahoma City would eventually be a better town than Fort Worth. And I made a deal with him and brought down 2 young men with me that had been in Colorado Springs with me, and they had worked for a while in St. Joe on my brother's paper, and they took a little stock too. We couldn't buy the control because he wanted the control, but we did get an option to buy some more stock, or I did later. Well, anyway, we organized the Oklahoma Publishing Company, and I started as manager on the 27th of January, but our charter was not issued in Guthrie until the 6th of February, but that was the Oklahoma Publishing Company. First thing I did was to sell that job shop and get it out of there, and then commenced to look around for a place to. I got a room, an adjoining building for my own office because there was no room there, and then I began to look for a place and made a contract to build a 2-story and basement building, corner of California and Robinson, the northeast corner there. It was built for us, and had 6 times the area of the shop he had. And I went then and ordered a new press, a perfecting press with a stereotype equipment and so forth. And we moved into the new building in October. And we could print a fairly decent paper there, up to 16 pages with red headlines. Sometimes it was called the Red-Headed Daily. And I might describe a little about Oklahoma City other than that. There were 4 blocks of paving, that's all. There was 1 block on Main Street and 1 on Grand Avenue, and 2 from Grand Avenue up to First Street on Broadway. That's all the paving we had. There were no automobiles, none had come to town. Of course, there weren't many then. And I walked as far as I could find a house on West Main Street, the 900 block, and about 8 or 10 blocks on the east of Santa Fe, and Trump Street on the north was the Dewey Cottage, was about the last cottage. And I walked over to Capitol Hill, which is now Capitol Hill. There were probably 20, 25 frame houses over there. And of course, they were all dirt roads. It really was a cow town, and it didn't look very promising. The other thing, they told me that there were 3 men to 1 woman in the town, and that was about right, I think. The town was full of young men who had come into the territory to get a start and help grow up with the territory. And of course, I was one of the same kind. And they also said that there was only 1 man on Main Street that was over 35 years of age, that is, that owned this really retail establishment. I think I was a mistake. I think there were 2 or 3, but anyway, everybody was young and come here to make a start. Well, one of the first things, of course, I cleaned up the plant as much as I could, but they had a They had a celebration here, and they got a company of soldiers, cavalry, come up here from Fort Sill to entertain the Cattlemen's Convention was here. And they paraded around town, and some drunken fella shot a soldier and killed him. And there's a big murder story, of course, and I stayed up around that night to see if everything was in type and ready to go. The next morning I picked up the paper. There was no story about it at all. And I was pretty mad, and I went down to the office, and I wondered why that hadn't run, and they told me Mr. Stafford had stopped it because the Chamber of Commerce had asked him to hurt the town to publish a story like that. Well, I said, we're going to get out an extra. We're going to have that story. And fortunately or unfortunately, there was another murder right next to our building in the alley there. And by noon, we had out an extra with the two murders in it. Well, the paper was getting only a little snatches of news, one telegram at a time, called a pony service. They didn't have a wire service, and I applied for a wire service. And it took us some couple of months maybe to get that, but we got the Associated Press wire then, and we did that we moved it into the building. That new building, we moved into the old California in Robinson. And shortly after I was in there, I came down one morning, as I always came down early, and a reporter rushed out and told me that there was a man there that wanted to shoot somebody, and a policeman. And we'd had a story in the paper there that the gamblers in town, the payoff man was the assistant chief of police, and he was going around collecting the money for the police department, and he was down there with a gun. Well, they told me not to go back there, but I went back in their room, and there was a reporter there. He was standing over him with a gun in his hand, and the man didn't know whether he'd written it or not, and when I came in, he said, "Did you write that article?" I said, "I'm not a reporter. I didn't write the article, but I'm the business manager of this paper, and I'm responsible for it." And I said, "You're wearing the uniform of a peace officer, coming in here with a gun in your hand, threatening to shoot somebody. Now go take off that uniform of a peace officer if you're going to come around here with a gun." Well, that man wilted about it. And he fumbled and tried to put his gun back in his holster, and then he tried to stammered and tried to say something, didn't say anything, and he sneaked out. It is fortunate for him, I didn't know it. He was standing by an open doorway into the next room, and he was standing there, and the foreman of the composing room was on one side, the foreman of the stereotype room was on the other. Each of them had a steel bar 23 inches long and an inch square, which is called a shooting stick, by the way, in the composing room. And they were there just ready. If he raised his gun, he would have been killed. Now, very thankful he sneaked out. We didn't hear any more from him. Well, then, in February of 1904, I'll jump along there, I had there was a lot of news about Russia and Japan were going to war, that they were threatening each other, and the Russian fleet had gone around there to attack Japan and so on. And we didn't print any Monday morning paper. Neither Guthrie nor Wichita printed any Monday morning paper, and we didn't hear. And I was afraid this war would break out on Sunday. So I contacted the Associated Press to see what I could get the wire on Sunday, and they said, yes, won't cost you anything except you pay the operator. Well, I arranged to pay the operator, and we started the receiving on Sunday, the story. And sure enough, the Japs attacked the Russian fleet. We expected Russia to attack Japan, was the other way. And it was a big story, and we had 7-column paper, and Hudson, who was a telegraph editor, ran a 7-column top, news, and sent it down to be set, 7 columns about the Russo-Jap War. But at the same time, there was news items coming in from Baltimore, that there was a fire on the docks in Baltimore. He sent down a 1-column head on that story. But there kept coming news both ways, on the war and the war from Baltimore. Well, to make a long story short, Baltimore had a $200 million fire that gutted out all of their warehouses and the docks. It spread uptown and burned the fireproof office buildings and all. I saw them afterwards. And it was the best handled fire story that I've ever seen, because they gave the name and owners of every building that was burned. They gave the amount of insurance on it, and it's just a complete story, and it kept coming in. Well, we wound up with 4-column head on the Baltimore fire and a 3-column head on the Russo-Jap War. And I wanted this, no other paper was printing, between us and Kansas City and Dallas. And I wanted to get this out, so we doubled and trebled and quadrupled the draw of our newsstands over the states, in different towns. And I sent some men to Wichita with 2,500 copies, because I phoned up there, and the Wichita Eagle was dark, and Guthrie Capital was dark, so I sent 1,500 copies up to there with men, and they shot it and sold them all around. Of course, they waked up that town. A few years afterwards, I met Mr. Murdoch, Victor Murdoch, who was the publisher of the Wichita Eagle. And in fact, I was at his house for dinner in Washington. He was a congressman. And he told me that he was walking from his home down to his office, and he found boys all over the streets hollering, "Daily Oklahoma, Daily Oklahoma." He couldn't understand. Well, that gave us a great boost, all over the state. And it was a very fortunate thing for us, and our circulation jumped up rapidly from that time on. Well, now the Guthrie State Capitol was swearing to 20 and 21,000 circulation. And my circulation men around the country came in and said, "Why, they haven't got any circulation like that. We're selling more papers to all these towns than they are. They can't have 20,000 circulation. Where's it go? Guthrie's little place, they only got 1,500 houses there." So I sent people up there to watch the press run. You could see it through the windows. And took the timing of the press run and the number of boys, the number of sacks of mail they took and everything. And a friend of mine who had worked in the headquarters of the post office department in Washington, and he had an entree up there, and he got for us the total poundage of second-class mail out of Guthrie for a period of some months. Well, there were 14 publications there, mostly weeklies and monthlies, besides the Capitol. And if we credited all of that poundage to the Capitol, it wouldn't have over 7,000 circulation. So I wrote a story about this, 3 or 4 pages, and sent it to Printers Inc., which at that time was the Bible of the advertising industry, and strangely enough, they published it as libelous as could be, And that's the truth. But they published it. Well, it made a sensation in all the among advertisers and advertising agencies, and pretty soon a man from the Darcy Advertising Agency in St. Louis came into my office and after he asked if he could see our circulation records, reports, and he said, "You can see anything you want to," and talk with anybody and watch the press run, and you can talk with the carriers and do anything you want to and see anything you want to. Well, he says, have you got your inventories of newsprint? Sure, I said, here they are. They're pasted in a book. You can see every pound of papers we bought. Well, he stayed there 3 or 4 days, and he gave us clean bill of health. In fact, he came out with 6 copies more than I'd sworn to as the total. And then he went up to Guthrie. Well, the proprietor there told him, why, I'm not going to let a one-horse agency in St. Louis come down here and make an examination. I'll have this examined by a big agency like NWA or somebody. They wouldn't let him see anything, wouldn't tell him anything. Well, of course, he stayed around, and he went down and watched their press run, and he talked with all their carrier boys, and he saw the amount of mail that they took to the post office and everything, and he was convinced that they didn't have more than 6,000 circulations, which was true. And this made quite a rumpus all over the country, you know. They knew that we had exposed this, and some years later, they organized the Audit Bureau of Circulation. They wanted to have some check on the circulation so that a publisher couldn't make such fraudulent affidavits as they had up there. And I was appointed one of 4 newspaper. There were 30 directors. I was one of 4 newspaper publishers, and they had magazine publishers. They had advertising agency men and advertisers. There's 30 of them there, and that has been in operation ever since. And checks the newspaper that doesn't belong to that doesn't get much recognition. In fact, practically every newspaper in the United States belongs to that now. Well, anyway, I better hurry along here. Empress University was organized about 1905 there too. That is now Oklahoma City University. Of course, afterwards it was moved to Guthrie and then came back here again. And the Oklahoma City News started here. The Scripps Howard paper started here in 1906, and they published till 1939, but they never made any money, and they finally folded up in 1939. Now, I had no knowledge of it. I was in Hawaii at the time, but they wired me, and I came back here. They just simply folded up and left. But in 1911, we changed the Weekly Oklahoman to the Farmer Stockman, made it an agricultural paper, and it's now a paper with over 400,000 circulation, and has really helped build the agricultural industry in the state. And it hasn't been too profitable, but we didn't expect that. But we spread to Texas, and we have a Texas edition, spread to Kansas, and so we have the 3 states here covered with the Farmer Stockman. The Weekly Oklahoman only had about 3,000 circulation. We didn't think the daily should take place of it anyway. Now the Pointer was a free paper started here about that time, about 1906, and it was a free distribution paper. It really developed quite a lot of business, and of course they didn't have to spend anything on news. They had 1 or 2 reporters, and it was nearly all advertising sheet. It got to be quite a menace to the evening paper here. The Times was owned by a man that had been in St. Joe, Missouri, and it was being hurt very badly with this. And I saw that something had to be done, and it seemed to me the only way to compete with the Pointer was start another free paper, which we did. And the Free Press, and we ran that for 11 months. And it was a good paper. We had put the news in it as well as the advertising, and really got to be a profitable paper. But when the Pointer folded up, we folded up the free press also. And because we had been opposed to this free distribution newspaper. And then in the Times, though, had a hard time competing with the Scripps Howard News, and they finally went into bankruptcy, and it was offered for sale, and the Okla Publishing Company bought it for $30,000. And we, of course, went right ahead to developing it, and tried to make a good paper out of it. And eventually, yet, of course, got superior to the news there, and eventually the news suspended in 1939. They had wanted us to buy it, but under the laws of this state, you couldn't buy out a competitor that way, and we were afraid to do that, and so we wouldn't do it. And so I was away, but they suspended publication. They cabled me that I came home, but they had operated from 1906 to 39, and there were only 3 years that they'd paid expenses, and they just got out of here. But they have papers all over the country, you know. They have 18 or 20 now, and well then. It's pretty long here because I'll take more time than you want to spend on this. Statehood came along in 1907, and the state had grown, or the territory rather, the city had grown from the supposedly 10,000 in 1900 to actually there was a special census President Roosevelt had made, and there were over 32,000 in Oklahoma City in 1907. And statehood came, and then of course things kind of boomed. And we had Prohibition come in with the statehood, and of course that closed up all the saloons and so on, but it didn't hurt business too much. And of course after that, why the bootleggers got busy finally. But now in 1909, we had bought the corner at 4th and Broadway about 1907 or 6 or 7, and planned to build a building there. And in 1909, we let the contract to build the building there in January of 1909. Well, that very month we had a fire in our building, which is the corner of California and Robinson, and an explosion of gas in the basement, and it was pretty well gutted. All of our linotype machines fell into the basement through the floor. I ran over to the Western Union to get them to let us print it there, and while the fire was still going, and it was of course our press was the rollers on our press melted and all that sort of thing. Well, anyway, we got back into production there after printing, and we printed 2 different offices in town for about 10 days, and we got so we could print again in the Oklahoman plant. Well, we had started building at 4th and Broadway in January, and it took us till September. We moved in, though it wasn't completely finished. We moved in there then. Well, one thing that happened very important, the stockyards. Mr. Wilson, who was then representing another company, came down to announce that they wanted to build a packing plant here, stockyards and their plant. And he had a meeting with with just a few of us at the Chamber of Commerce. I was one of four, Mr. Klassen and Mr. Brock, who was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I think Mr. Chartel, and we finally came to a deal that we had to give them a bonus of $300,000, but they were to build a packing plant out there, and that deal, of course, was announced. In the meantime, we had to go out and auction up all the land for them as a packing plant, and that all had to be done without any publicity, of course. And of course, when it was announced that they were going to come, why, it was a big thing. But the stockyards, the first plant was Schwarzschild and Sulzberger, and built there, and then the armor plant was the armor plant was built first, and then Schwarzschild and Sulzberger. Well, Mr. Wilson came down after he'd been there only a year or so, and bought out. He organized his own company and bought out Schwarzschild and Sulzberger, and that became the Wilson plant, which is out there today. As you know, armor finally they changed their policy. They put in a lot of small plants in cities all around instead of having as big plants as they had. And they closed up their plant here eventually. Well, the Pointer here had been started in 1906 as a free paper, thrown away free all around the city, and it got considerable advertising, interfering particularly with the Times and with the News, which is printed by Scripps Howard, and it took a lot of business away from them. It took some away from the Oklahoman too. But I saw they weren't doing anything about it, and something had to be done. The free newspaper didn't go outside of the city, and it didn't have much news in it. And so we decided the only way to fight fire was to fight fire with fire, and we started the Free Press, which was a free giveaway paper too. We started it and ran it for 11 months, and it was a real newspaper rather than the Pointer had very little news in it. We had a news service which they didn't have, and it took the play away from them. And finally the Pointer sold their plant and other things to Times bought some of their plant and other things, and so the Pointer went out of the picture, and we suppressed the Free Press, much to the disappointment of the merchants downtown, because they had come to use it very heavily. But we didn't want a free paper because it could only be circulate in the city, and we wanted the newspaper should cover the whole state. And well, anyway, the fight for the capital came up. You know, the statehood came in 1907, and the provision of the Constitution was such that you could get up a petition, you know, for anything. And I consulted lawyers. I was sure that the provision in the state, in the Enabling Act of the statehood, was not binding. It said that the capital had to remain in Guthrie until 1913. Well, a sovereign state can place any of its institutions anywhere it wants to. And on that theory, I had the circulation department, or circulation men, that traveled over the state. I had attorneys, had Judge Ledbetter draw up a petition to vote the capital from either in Oklahoma City, Guthrie, or Shawnee, because Shawnee was claiming they ought to be capital. he didn't think we'd need to put in Shawnee, but I said, well, put in Shawnee, they'll vote themselves and won't vote for Guthrie. Which they did. And Oklahoma City carried it by over 50,000 majority. And Governor Haskell immediately moved the capital down to the Huckins Hotel. And it seemed that Judge Ledbetter, in drawing up this, hadn't used the exact commission of 3 commissioners to build the Capitol. And they were starting to build it, but they labored. They didn't make any contract, and they were hiring people, and so Judge Williams wanted to do away with that, and he appointed a commission of 7, a commission to oversee the whole thing. Well, they really replaced these others without saying so. And Judge Roth and myself and 5 others were made a commission of 7, and we immediately arranged to have a contract let. And the contract was let to a company that had just finished building a state capitol in Utah. And we built that capitol out there. And here's the funny thing, the legislature had put a provision in there that the capitol was to be a 3-story building. Well, of course, when you come to figure all the departments that had to go into the capitol, we couldn't possibly get them in 3 stories on the amount of ground that they're going to build on. So the architects solved the problem. They had a basement and a sub-basement, and they had a mezzanine floor, so they gave us 6 floors. And that's the way the Capitol was built. It's a 3-story building with 6 floors. Well, the city had been plugging for a new post office. We had a little post office down here, it's wholly inadequate and everything, and the Chamber of Commerce and the number of people that controlled it, some certain bankers here, I remember Frank Johnson was the head of them, they picked out a site on Harvey between Grand and Main Street. And they were going to have that. They all, the Chamber of Commerce endorsed it all, everybody signed it. But I had a friend who had worked in the Capitol up there, in the post office department up in Washington, I said. And we had a picture of about 8 inches of water over those lots there on very flat on Harvey between Main and Grand. And this friend of mine took this picture up to Washington, and nobody else knew about it. They sent a man down here to locate the post office, and he came down and looked at the site that they showed him, you know. They went around and he picked the site up at 3rd and Robinson. And I attended meetings at the Chamber of Commerce where they just couldn't understand it. Everybody was unanimous, and they were endorsing this location on the highway down here and between Main and Grand, and they couldn't understand why he went up there. We had nothing to do with locating up there, but we did have something to do with their not locating. I don't think that story's ever been printed. Well, one of the great drawbacks to Oklahoma City was the Rock Island train and the Frisco trains running right through the business center. And the Chamber of Commerce had a committee for about 20 years working with those railroads, trying to get them to move their tracks. And they always would argue, but never would do anything. And finally, a new commission was appointed, Judge Ames and Judge Hayes and another man, they were supposed to meet with the presidents of Frisco and the Rock Islands to come to some kind of conclusion. And they had tentatively agreed to let the passenger trains go through here, but to move the freight trains around Southtown. Well, that wasn't at all acceptable to a lot of us, and I went and protested, and I got cussed out for it, but I happen to think that Frank Buttram was a very intimate friend of Mr. Ecker, the president of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. At that time, both these railroads were in hock. Their bonds were worth about 50 cents on the dollar, and the Metropolitan Life had most of these bonds. And so I asked Frank to go and talk to Mr. Ecker and show him the condition there, that we wanted that railroad out of there and that we'd pay him to move it. And he went up there and he said, "Why, shucks," he says, "of course, Oklahoma City wants that track out of there." And he had a one man named Brown who was a director of both the Rock Island and the Frisco, and he just told him to get those presidents down here and make a deal and sell there right away through here to the city, which was done. We paid $4 million, and we got the Civic Center out of it. That was the Frisco freight yards and everything there. And this Couch Drive, right through here is the old Rock Island right away, and we got rid of the trains. Well, I might mention that I had only bought a minority interest when I came here. First place, I guess I didn't have money enough to buy it. Mr. Stafford wouldn't sell the control. But in 1918, I did purchase the control from him, and for the group that were with me. I didn't personally have all the control with myself and others, and so we took over then. And he had went into the oil business from that time on. Then in 1928, 1916, I shouldn't overlook the fact we made Lake Overholser. We had 3 elections on Lake Overholser. The third one finally carried. All the water we had was in pipes that are driven in the gravel beds in the North Canadian River, and you couldn't know how much water there or when you'd get it all out. And we had to have a visible water supply, and that Lake Overholser was named for Henry Overholser. He worked on it. And the third election it carried, 1916. And the same year, the Times had been losing money all the time and wasn't doing well. And finally, it went up at sheriff's sale, and the Oklahoma Publishing Company purchased it in December 1915 for $30,000. And nobody else bid for it. And of course we took it and tried to improve it, and made a real newspaper out of it. And in 1918, Mr. Stafford had been doing quite a little gambling, and he was a very nice fellow, just his own. He was honest and all that, but he was very easygoing, and finally they elected me president, and he wouldn't stand for that, so he sold his stock. He had the control. Well, then I'll skip along here because I've used up the time. I got pretty used up the time now, and I haven't got to halfway through it. Of course, the Depression came on. The Depression came on. The oil discovery in 1928. That was a big thing. I was in London at the time, and the office wired me that they'd struck 40 million feet of gas out here, and I said to my wife, well, there's no radio in Oklahoma City. We've got to have a radio. We'll lose money on it. But I wired Mr. Bell, our manager, to go and buy WKY because I knew we'd have an oil field in Oklahoma City. And that's, of course, I knew we'd lose money on it, which we did for a couple of years, because you had a radio station, nobody had any radios to receive it. Same thing happened in 1948 when we started. We filed an application for a television station in Oklahoma City. Nobody else had filed for one. There's very few around the country, and they'd been begging people to apply for a television permit. We applied for one. We knew we'd lose money on it because nobody could receive it if you put on a program. But in 1948, we got, well, I'd expected it to take at least 90 days, red tape up there in Washington, but we got it back almost by return mail. Well, another important thing, well, we built our mechanical plant there beyond there, 4th and Broadway, the mechanical plant there toward the Santa Fe tracks in 1930. In 1931, we organized the Mistletoe Express, and that was the result of the Depression. The railroads took off a lot of their passenger trains we'd been using for express our papers. For instance, between here and Lawson, which is an important point for us, they only had one train a day and left at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was too late for the Oklahoman, too early for the Times. So we decided we'd have to put in our own, and we first got trucks for the circulation department, but we saw that we'd have to have a separate organization. We organized Mistletoe Express in 1931. It now covers 5 states and is a very important factor in the development of Oklahoma. Well, that's the other thing. Oh yes, in 1934, I happened to be president of the Southern Publishers Association. They decided to try to build a paper mill to make newsprint from southern pine. The Canadian mills all said you couldn't make newsprint out of southern pine. And we'd sent some carloads up there, and they said it wouldn't work. But we organized the Southland Paper Mills in Lufkin, Texas, and we hadn't planned to do anything but the publishers just buy the output for 5 years, but they lacked $500,000, so we went to work, and in a couple of days we raised $500,000 among the publishers and started the plant at Lufkin, which now has 4 machines there, and has built a plant in Houston with 2 machines there, and it's doing a tremendous business in selling paper all over. And that was the starting of probably a dozen plants now. There's a big plant in Tennessee, and there's one in Arkansas, and one in Mobile, and they're in Florida, they're just in Alabama, and the Southern Publishers helped to build that one in Coosa River, Alabama. In fact, we had control of it for some time. Well, now, I think my time is up. And, I haven't got to the later.
Take this long as you wish.
No, I don't. Pardon?
Take this long as you wish.
Well, I don't want to do that. But now we had drought years, you know, in 1934 and 35 that are terrific, and it's during the Depression too, and we decided, you know, we had to have more water for Oklahoma City, and Lake Hefner, we undertook that building of Lake Hefner, and it was a very hard fight to get enough votes to build Lake Hefner, but of course that was the saving of it. Of course, later on, as you know, we got the Atoka plant, so forth. Now Tinker Field was something that really ought to be mentioned. Stanley Draper had gone to Washington a number of times and got the big brass favorable to locating a plant in Oklahoma City. But they sent three men out, three men, there was a captain, 2 lieutenants down here, and with instructions, there were 5 places they could look to come to Oklahoma City first, and Wichita second, so on. And these fellows wouldn't meet with the Chamber of Commerce. They said they wanted one man from the Chamber to give them all the information they wanted. They worked with him about a week, and then they came in and said, we want these things by 4 o'clock this afternoon. They wanted a 24-inch water line from Capitol Hill, it was about 8 miles, to Tinker Field. We had offered them the 290 acres there at Tinker, location Tinker Field. They wanted an option on some other land. They wanted a railroad built in there. They wanted 40 miles of roads, the state highway, around the Tinker area. One of them gravel, and this paved road from Capitol Hill was to be 6-lane paved, and so forth. They wanted all of this by 4 o'clock that afternoon. Well, Stanley Draper was a captain, and he and Judge Havener was mayor, and they wanted of course, the city would have to vote to pay for that water line out there, and also they wanted the paving from Capitol Hill to Tinker Field, and that had to be voted on in bonds. And we went to the city council, and some of them almost cried, said, well, we'd have to go to jail if we do that. And I said, well, I got the same cell with you, but you're going to turn down a $45 million payroll just because you're a little afraid of that? And well, they signed that up. And we went to the state highway department, and they signed up to build the 40 miles of road around Tinker Field. And at 4 o'clock, we gave them, I called the head of the railroad in Philadelphia, and got a wire from him that they'd build a railroad track in there, which they'd asked for. They wanted so much power, and of course OG&E offered them all the power they wanted, gas company and all that. But all of these things, they'd given us something they knew we couldn't do in one day, and they had friends in Wichita, and they were going up there and give it to them. And they bought their tickets to Wichita. And at 4 o'clock that afternoon, we gave them the signed a document from the city and from the highway department and from the railroads and from everybody, everything they'd asked for. And they were dumbfounded, but we got to Tinker Field. Well, anyway, I better stop right there because I know your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Gaylord, for sharing some of your experiences with us. I'm sure that we'd like to hear you go on for the rest of the evening, but we appreciate very much your coming and sharing with us. Marvin?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gaylord. We've been honored with your presence. We've been entertained. Thank you.